Please take your seats. We're starting right on time now today, a couple seconds later. I'd like to offer all of my great and warm welcome for all of your travel. Thank you very much for doing it. I know we've had a couple of scrambles this morning. Thank you, Supervisor, for finding that next flight and getting here on time. I'm Lucy Dunn. I'm a member of the California Transportation Commission and chair of our TAC, Technical Advisory Committee on Road Charge for the Commission. And I really appreciate you being here in our first meeting for 2020. Thank you. I appreciate that. Our last meeting was in April of 2019 and right here in San Francisco. And we had a lot has occurred since then. New administration, new issues to deal with, and a lot to prepare California to transition into someday a very, very successful, I bet you, road charge program for the future. So, as usual, this is a public hearing, and comments from the public are always welcome. But if someone from the public wishes to speak on an item, we ask them to fill out a form. Douglas, right back here in the blue shirt, has those forms to complete, and then he'll bring them up and we'll call you up at just the right time. A couple of logistics things for us all before we begin. The restrooms, if you've been to this room before, you know the restrooms are just out this door, make a right, and they're on your right as you go right around. Can't miss them. Our lunch is going to be delivered somewhere between 11:30 and noon today, because I have to tell you this, because everybody always wonders where lunch is, right? 11:30 to noon, it'll be delivered, and our calendar, our agenda for today shows that we break about 12:15. Hopefully, quick pick up your sandwich. We're going to make this a working lunch because we think we've got a lot of material to go over today. And lastly, lunch, the cost for lunch is $10 per person. So if you would please give your $10 so that Douglas and Hannah don't have to chase you down. If you could give them to Douglas right back there, or Hannah right here on the corner, that would be great. And we'll take care of your lunch. Any other logistics that I missed or that you might have questions about? Okay. So with that, Doug, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Member Bartlett.
Here.
Senator Bell. Member Benzel.
Here.
Assemblymember Chu. Vice Chair Finnegan.
Here.
Member Kay. Member Tien.
Here.
Member Madaffer.
Here.
Member Marcantonio.
Here.
Member O'Connor.
Here.
Member Ornelas.
Here.
Member Poitras.
Yes.
Member Sauer.
Present.
Member Wax.
Here.
Chair Dunn.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Excellent. Thank you all. And again, thank you for being here. Our next item on the agenda is any public comment. Are there any public comments submitted? None. Great. Moving right along to item number 4 on our agenda. We have the minutes from the April 2019 TAC meeting. If you would take a look at those.
And if I could remember that far back, I'll move approval.
We have a motion by Mr. Finnegan, a second by Mr. Wax. Any comments? Very good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And any opposition? Very good. Thank you. Minutes are approved. Okay, next up, we have our member reports. Technical Advisory Committee members could provide to us verbal reports on any activities that they've taken. Are there any road charge related reports you'd like to share? Supervisor.
Thank you, Chair. So I was in Washington, D.C. and had a White House briefing about a month ago. And on the panel, there was a panelist from transportation who indicated that they were going to look at what are they going to do to backfill the gap from the federal excise tax. And they're looking at a federal interoperability for a road charge pilot program from the federal perspective. But I think they're really far behind where we are at this point, because I said, well, how are you going to roll it out? And they're talking about, well, we're thinking of charging based on the type of vehicle or the tires. You know, we started with all of this way back when. So I suggested they contact our road charge group here to gain knowledge about what we've done with our 5,000 vehicle pilot program, lessons learned before they get started and spend a lot of time kind of spinning their wheels. So they thought that was a great idea. And I forgot to bring the gentleman's card with me, but I will get that information over to the chair.
That's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other reports from members? Yes, Mr. Wax.
I should report that I was the keynote speaker at the MBUFA winter meeting, the Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance, which was held in Los Angeles, and several people present here were there. Steve Keck was, and Hannah was, and Garth was, and were you there, Lauren? Yeah, Lauren was too. And they also put my talk on their website as a written document, and just in very briefly, because I know we have a long agenda, the theme of the talk was about the importance of demonstration programs, and it acknowledged that demonstration programs are important for technological reasons. They prove the technology, but more important for public familiarization with road charges, because we see a change in attitude toward them once people have participated in those experiments. So that's online, and I thought you should know about it. Thanks.
And will you guys get a copy of the link and maybe add that to our minutes so that we can take a look at that? That'd be great. Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Finnegan.
I had a quick update, and I shared this with a few other folks. If you don't know, the Auto Club of Southern California operates the AAA clubs in part or all of 21 states, and one of ours is part of Virginia. And in Virginia, the governor has a transportation funding package that includes a 4-cent gas tax increase, followed by indexing, sounds familiar, and a fee for non-gas vehicles, which could be a straight dollar fee, or the language in there indicates that it could be a road charge based on miles. So they're a ways behind us, but they are beginning to move down that path. So I just wanted to share that.
Great. Any other reports from our members? Excellent. Thank you. I'm so happy we're all still keeping on track of this stuff and studying this stuff as it moves forward. It does look like it's a time. I worry sometimes that with SB1 funding secured, that folks don't realize that that's just not the end of the solution, that we have to keep moving forward on new ideas and new opportunities for improvement. So, yes, Mr. Medaffer.
Just a brief comment to just say, as I look around this table and having heard Supervisor Bartlett's comments, and frankly others, it's just really good to see this group, this technical advisory committee that started back, 5 years ago now, 2015. We're all together. We all have some incredible experience and background, probably unlike any other state in the country. And I just want to extend my appreciation and thanks for all of you sticking with this and staying on task.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so moving on. Oh, I'm sorry.
Madam
Yes.
Chair, thank you. Since we're in the Bay Area,
Yes.
it's a little off topic, but on the topic of public transportation, I just wanted to mention that we in the Bay Area are in the midst of a big discussion right now about authorizing legislation to put a 9-county regional measure on the ballot to fund public transportation. And there are competing visions for this. There's Faster Bay Area that is proposing a 1-cent sales tax. I'm part of a coalition called Voices for Public Transportation that's proposing progressive revenue sources and a different vision for the expenditures.
And if anyone would like more information, please check.
Oh, excellent.
Thank you.
If you can share that with staff, we'll add it to the minutes as well for people to link into. Excellent. Members, anything else? Okay, very newsy groups. That's excellent. All right, so next item, agenda number 6. I'm going to give you a brief overview of today's meeting, just so we have a roadmap for today. The first I want to share with you is, you noticed Susan Branson is not here, our executive director for the commission for several years, a great asset to us and really took the commission to new levels. We're sad to see her leave, but she has a well-deserved track record of decades of public service in this industry and around, certainly around the state of California on many different fronts. So Susan has now retired. The commission did an extensive search for the next executive director, interviewed a number of great candidates from around the nation and the state, and ended up with the best man for the job, and that is Mitch Weiss. And so welcome, Mitch Weiss, to your new role as our executive director. So he will continue now to take over the good work for the commission, and we're happy to have him on board. He will also introduce in a little bit later new staff that's working on road charge issues for the commission. So first Mitch, and then the other great person to introduce, you know, with a new administration, a new governor, even though he's really not new anymore, but new to us and our technical advisory committee is our brand new Secretary of Transportation is David Kim. And so welcome as well, Mr. Secretary. We're delighted to have you here, and we know you're going to comment in a few minutes, but if you could join me in welcoming our new Secretary. Thank you. All right, so the focus of the meeting today is first learn what our commission staff and Caltrans staff have been working on related to road charge. Next, begin to develop a shared plan for what actions we want to take over the next few years together. There are 3 presentations that we'll be looking at today in your packet. Commission staff and Caltrans staff will provide updates on their work and their proposed work plans for your comment and review. We're also, I asked for this just to remind us, again, once again, SB1 funding did not solve all the problems, so I asked for us again to review a presentation on transportation revenue projections for the state of California, just so we can keep that in our head and know where, why we're doing what we're doing. We've built in time for questions at the end of each presentation, so don't hesitate to jot down those questions and we'll discuss them as we go along and make sure that we don't miss anything. So that's a little bit of an overview. Is there anything else for today's agenda that anyone wishes to add, or we can just jump right in? Okay, good. Seeing nothing, it's a lot of stuff. And I appreciate it very, very much. So, oh, yes, Mr. Tien.
I just have one simple question, which is, does anyone know about pending legislation right now that is sort of relevant to what we're talking about? I do not myself, I'm just asking.
Yes. Anyone? The only thing that I personally have been watching is discussions in Washington, D.C. about it that Lisa had mentioned, but I don't have anything in hand, but nothing at the state level to our knowledge. Thank you. Good question. All right. Very good. Well, then, answering that question further will be our new Secretary of Transportation, David Kim. Floor is yours, sir.
Sorry about that. I'll start all over. Good morning, Madam Chair, Vice Chairman Finnegan, and members of the committee. It is wonderful to see you this morning, and I'm really excited to be here. This is my first meeting of the Technical Advisory Committee since I started this position, which was back in July, and I believe the last time you met was April before I got here, and while my predecessor, Brian Andis, was on his way to the California High-Speed Rail Authority. So thank you for having me. And some of you I know very well, others I don't know, and I look forward to working with you and getting to know you. Madam Chair, you and I go back many years, same with Vice Chair Finnegan, Jim Medaffer, Professor Wax, and in particular, Pam O'Connor. We go way back from our LA Metro days when Pam was on the board and I was head of government affairs for LA Metro many years ago. So it's great to see all of you. I want to start by recognizing a member of my team who was originally going to be here, but is not here. She became ill, and so she is recuperating at home. Laurie Pepper, Deputy Secretary for Innovative Mobility Solutions. Laurie, you're watching at home. I hope you feel better, and take the weekend to rest and recuperate. Laurie was appointed to this position by the governor in August, and this is a brand-new position within the California State Transportation Agency, Deputy Secretary for Innovative Mobility Solutions. The position has never before existed. I wanted somebody who could look at the future of transportation, especially given the fact that there is a convergence between technology and transportation, and the transportation sector is rapidly transforming before our eyes. So her role is to look at the future, look at not just technological advancements, but innovative solutions and strategies as well, so we can stay ahead of the curve as the world moves by so very quickly. And so Laurie is a key member of my team, and she is helping to staff the work of this commission, or this committee rather. And so I hope you'll have a chance to meet her at the next meeting, whenever that will be. So let me start with the big picture. I think we all know the major pressing transportation challenges in front of us. Congestion and commutes are a reality everywhere up and down the state. The transportation sector is responsible for 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. There is this growing phenomenon of extreme commuters, people who live far away from their jobs. The house they can afford to buy is 2 or 3 hours away from where they work, which is exacerbating wear and tear on our aging network and also impacting their own individual quality of life. So many challenges, and of course, a population that is growing and aging. And we also have on top of that very ambitious climate change and environmental goals. And in order to achieve those goals, we're going to gradually have to shift to electrified powertrains and gradually wean ourselves from the internal combustion engine. We all know that will have impacts when it comes to transportation revenue and the gas tax, and that's why you're all here, we're all here to address that very issue. And so as alternative fuel powertrains become the norm in California, which will happen in the years ahead, the importance of this work and this committee become even more heightened. And so that's what's in front of us right now. And at the same time, as we're going to hear later today from our expert academicians here, future projections when it comes to gas tax revenue are perhaps not quite as dire as we may have expected a few years ago. So I think that gives us a little bit of time to really take a thorough and thoughtful approach when it comes to the longer-term future of transportation funding in California. I know many of you are curious to know what are my thoughts on road charge? Where is the administration? So let me take a moment to explain. I'm fully on board. I fully understand the importance of road charge. I talked about it during my confirmation hearing in the state Senate, and so this is front and center. That's why I'm excited to be here and to work closely with all of you as we develop a plan ahead. There is a lot of work needed to get to that future where we can actually deploy, and so that's why we're all here. There are a few caveats I want to mention. We got to get this right. This is a massive logistical, administrative, technical, political undertaking. To that end, I want to make sure we are methodical, thorough, and thoughtful in our approach. No rash decisions. We need to do our due diligence, and so to that end, I have directed Caltrans to do a research scan, to look at the vast body of research and to really get our arms around what we know about road charge. There are also, I want to add, there are also policy questions that are unexamined, and there are research gaps. And so we still have a ways to go, and to use an analogy, I want to make sure there is a solid foundation in place before we build the house. That foundation is not here yet. We have a ways to go. It is a work in progress. And so the challenge for all of us is to design a road charge program that truly benefits all Californians, regardless of where they live, regardless of how they travel around the state. And as we're going to hear later today, Caltrans' road charge program has been designing a work plan with the input of this committee, including recommendations from the last pilot that will be integrated into the current demonstration project. Also, Caltrans will present on 2 options that I am considering for submission to the Surface Transportation Funding Alternatives Program. Let me see if I got that right. Surface Transportation System Funding Alternatives Program, as created in the FAST Act of 2015. As you know, this is a grant program, annual grant program, and applications are due in April. So you will hear an overview of what is being considered for submission to the U.S. Department of Transportation. So, as we continue to develop a road charge program, the administration and legislature have some key policy decisions to make in the years ahead, and I hope that all of you, as the members of this committee, continue to provide your thoughts and recommendations as this process moves forward. So with that, Madam Chair, thank you so much for having me, and I don't know if there's time to answer questions. If not, I'd be happy to answer them.
Absolutely.
If not, we can move on to the next agenda item.
Very good. Colleagues, do you have any questions for the Secretary right now? Yes.
I'll jump in for just a second. I think, one, thank you very much for those comments. And I think I was asking somebody earlier, I'd forgotten when the legislation was actually passed that created this, and that was back in 2014, and then the committee started in 2015, and we've been working since. And I think some of the discussions that'll happen today and beyond today is about timing and how do we move forward effectively and productively. But I think your comments about getting this right and recognizing both the challenges and the importance of this are spot on, and I think they've been spot on with this group all along. So I appreciate that, and I think it is a big deal. It may be out there, but we have to plan for and act to get there, and so I appreciate your comments on that.
I should also mention that I drive a hydrogen fuel cell.
Yay!
And it's a Hyundai Nexo. And so I look forward to paying that $100 fee on July 1st, which will take effect this July for all zero-emission vehicles.
I'm just happy it's not electric, because I think we need a variety of fueling options for mobility, not just one thing. So thank you for that, Mr. Secretary.
Sure.
Mr. Kay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and excuse me. Thank you for joining us today, Secretary Kim. I represent the California Chamber of Commerce, and I wanted to let you know, and have served on this committee since the outset, and wanted to let you know directly that we're strongly supportive of a road charge transition in California that ultimately replaces the fuel taxes. And so I'm very encouraged. I frankly didn't expect to hear from you today that you're on board with this approach, and by that I hope I can assume that you wouldn't be saying that if the administration wasn't on board with the approach as well. I just wanted to put our concerns on the table so you would know them directly, and that is that we've seen the previous administration and this administration absolutely dead set committed on the transition to, as you put it, an electrified or not fossil fuel drivetrain for transportation, that we're concerned that as that aggressive transition is made, that we're not keeping up with our need for paying for our transportation infrastructure, and that that we have, as you well know, we have two dynamics. We have not just the transition from fossil fuel based revenues, but we also have just a greater efficiency in vehicles that use fossil fuels. Plus, we have inflation. So we're going to have a secular erosion of the fuel taxes, no matter what happens, even if the transition to electric vehicles or fuel cell vehicles isn't as aggressive as the administration wants. So we're concerned that in the face of that, and because this is going to be a very controversial and difficult transition, even if we know everything that we need to know. It's going to take a lot of politics, a lot of communication, and a lot of support from the administration and the entire transportation and political establishment to have any hope that we can move to a brand new way of charging people. So I just want let you know that we're concerned that if you are, and you say you are, committed to this approach, that we stay with it and not just feel comfortable that we have enough money to last over the next few years and don't have to worry about it. So with that in mind, I would like to ask a question. And that is that you said that some policy questions remain unanswered, and I was wondering which policy questions those were.
That's a great question. I don't know, but I think there are lots of issues that still need to be explored and examined in more detail. And there's a whole range of them. And so I'm convinced that there are research gaps that still need to be closed. And so we've got a ways to go. We'll hear more about that. As I mentioned earlier, I directed Caltrans to do a research scan to examine the body of research that exists and to identify what further areas need to be researched. So more to come. I think your points are right on target. And although I do take some comfort in knowing, and I think Professor Weinstein-Agarwal made a presentation at the last CTC meeting looking at the future projection of revenues, both gas tax as well as the zero-emission vehicle fee that takes effect this July. And it's not as dire as it once was, and I think we'll hear more from the professor, but it's not like we're looking at a cliff tomorrow. We've got some time. We've got some time to get it right, to design it right, and to make that gradual transition. And to your point about communication, you're right on target. And as all of you know, Census 2020 is now upon us. The state of California has something called the California Complete Count Census 2020. This is a massive effort to get the word out and to reach out to especially the hardest to reach Californians, and to do this campaign in a way that is culturally competent and linguistically appropriate. If you think about the racial and ethnic diversity of California, if you think about who needs to know about road charge when the transition takes place, we're going to need a massive campaign along the lines of California Complete Count Census 2020. We've got to reach everybody. This is no small undertaking, and we got to do it right. Because this is a huge shift from the gas tax to something different. And this is going to require a significant marketing, outreach, PR, and communications effort to reach every Californian who needs to know about it in the language they speak.
Very good. Yes.
Thank you, Secretary Kim. I'm very glad to have you here. And, I was quite encouraged to hear your remarks and to hear about the new member of your team in innovation. As a technologist and cybersecurity professional, along with my colleague Lee in privacy, my concern is that, as we all see every day, technology is moving at an extremely rapid pace, and you alluded to that in your comments. But my concern is that the longer we stretch this out, the more behind we are, and that in some sense you have to jump on the moving train. And so the technological privacy and security considerations that this committee has been working with are moving very rapidly. And so while I certainly appreciate the communications and policy and PR that are going to be needed, I want to urge us as a committee, to grab this fast-moving train and really jump on, because otherwise we'll always be playing catch-up in the technological side. And the technological side, speaking from my biased perspective, right, is going to be really the key to it, right? How do we, get the information from the cars? How do we transfer it back? And so without getting that, at least as a first prototype, we're going to be lost. And then, finally, I'll just say the communications, and I really appreciate your analogy to 2020 census. I mean, yes, that is it. But I might ask you and others, here is how much communication was there when the gas tax even began? Prior to SB1, I don't know very many people, even with SB1, who really understand anything about gas tax.
I don't think anybody in this room was alive when the gas tax started.
They don't even know they're being taxed. They just buy gas.
Right.
And it's expensive in California, and it's not expensive in other places. I don't know. But I really wanted to hammer in on the point on technology.
No, that's a point well taken, and I appreciate that. And I think that the key is to strike that right balance between, on the one hand, moving with some sense of urgency, but at the same time, making sure we do our due diligence and examining those areas that need to be further examined. it is a balancing act, and so that's the challenge in front of all of us.
Mr. Wex. Colleagues, by the way, if you wouldn't mind, if you want to speak, I don't know if you can put these up.
It's
or-
doable.
It's doable? That would help me see you so I don't miss your comments, so.
Thank you. Like everyone else, I'm very pleased that you're here. And the way you stated the challenge is, I think, very accurate and appropriate, and thank you. The fact that SB1 has created a new revenue stream, or an increase in our revenue stream, which is temporary, but which is real, is an opportunity, not an excuse for saying, you know, we've solved that problem, let's back off on this road charge thing. And you clearly realize that. I mean, we bought a little bit of time, and it's going to take, and as you said, it takes a lot. It's going to take a decade or more for a transition. And the concern that I have, and I'm following up really on what Lauren said, the concern I have is that you recognize it, and the administration does, and we do, but I'm not convinced that the legislature does. And they are term limited, so why would they focus on something that's going to happen, you know, where the product is going to be delivered in 15 years? So I think the administration and we have a challenge to try to get them on board, to see that reality, to use this time to do the research and to improve the technology, but also the people who most need educating before everyone else is the legislature.
That's a great point, Professor Wax. I think you're right, and with the exception of members whom we know who chair the Assembly and Senate Transportation Committees and other members who are actively involved in transportation, if you talk about rank and file members who are not as engaged in transportation as people like Senator Bell, Assemblymember Frazier, and others, there is a need to educate them on why the gas tax as we currently know it is in the long run not sustainable. And furthermore, and this came up in a recent hearing where I testified, that SB1, as you know, obviously a huge accomplishment, but it is only a fraction, it only covers only a fraction of what we need to maintain and repair our roads and transportation systems. It doesn't cover everything. And at some point, there will need to be a replacement revenue source because the needs overwhelm the amount of revenue available. So you're right, there's a lot of educating to do among the public as well as members of the legislature.
Very good. Mr. Chan?
Hi, yeah, so I am not a transportation guy. I've been on this committee for a while, but I am here because we my organization, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, you know, recognize that there are significant privacy issues involved in the collection of data around traffic and transportation. So, and I think that one of the things that I really respect about the way that this committee has functioned is that even though many of the folks in this room really, really want the data, they also really understand that there are trade-offs and that we are trying to reach those in a way that also honors our concerns about equity, about how we are able to make sure that everyone has the benefit of the transportation opportunities. So I just wanted to emphasize that, you know, in today's modern political dynamic around smart cities, around the desires of cities and counties and municipalities to you know, get a lot of highly individualized and granular trip data, we have some significant privacy issues that are not only pure policy and they're not only revenue, but they are a matter of things like state statutes like the California Electronic Communications Privacy Act, which, you know, the legislature has said applies to the way that permits are being issued to mobility service operators. We have Supreme Court decisions like Jones and Carpenter that establish very clearly that the Fourth Amendment applies strongly to the collection of highly granular, individualized trip data. And so I just wanted to emphasize that we have these important sort of non-revenue values that are going to be constraining all the things we do, and that unfortunately I see that in the larger political dynamics talks in Congress, et cetera, there's a real push-pull. You know, there are really an enormous, there's quite a bit of force that says we want this data regardless of privacy issues. And at the same time, we see legislators beginning to understand how dangerous and revealing it can be for, say, you know, federal immigration authorities to have tremendously identifying data about everyone who is moving throughout a city. So we're seeing a real push-pull at the national level. I just want to emphasize that the importance of privacy as a constraint on activities continues to be really important here.
Thank you for raising that point, and I think you touched on an area that still needs to be further examined and solidified. We collectively need to absolutely convince those who have any concerns about potential privacy breaches or violations that this is not going to happen, that we have an airtight system, tested, confirmed, verified. Otherwise, we're going to have an uphill battle when it comes to convincing the public. So thank you for making that point.
Very good. Mr. Medaffer.
Thank you. And first of all, Mr. Secretary, again, thank you so much for being here. Like the others, it's refreshing to see your interest in this and your longstanding interest in this. So again, I completely agree. There's a lot of issues, political issues, social issues, privacy issues, technological issues, and the due diligence is very important. And we know that we have a very successful 5,000 vehicle pilot behind us. And I believe we're going to hear an update from Caltrans today on what they're doing with their pay at the pump study from the 2015 FAST Act, a grant that is currently underway. But as Terry stated, my concern remains the industry and technology is moving way faster than government, and it always does. And government's always playing catch up. That doesn't mean that we have to keep up. We have to do it right. We have to make sure it's done right. But I do remain concerned because we know this transition will take decades. It's not anything that's going to happen overnight. And I believe, and I continue to harp on the fact that we should be starting now. And I believe and continue to advocate that legislation should be passed that would enable the collection of a mileage fee, for example, for autonomous vehicles from the day they start rolling on the streets of California. The technology is there within the vehicle. We could, through legislation, establish a payment plan and a payment system, especially if it's an EV fleet or a hydrogen fleet or a non-fossil fuel fleet. But also, we can also use the same info that we had from our study to be able to give a credit on whatever gas taxes were paid. We've also heard at this TAC several years ago, both Uber and Lyft made comments that they would be willing to pay a per mile fee in lieu of a gas tax. Any of the TNCs, I believe, would fall into that. They could begin part of a transition now. Clearly, the technology exists within their platform to be able to account for that today. And I think this would be just the two that I've just mentioned would be the first step. The third one I'll throw out there that, again, I believe ought to happen now, and that's within a department of the state of California itself. We had talked at one point, I think at our meeting last April, we had a representative here from the Department of General Services. And we felt that, I believe this committee had talked about it, that we would like to see a function within the Department of General Services, part of their fleet, to start paying by the mile. Again, these are things that we can do without concern or regard for the most important thing out there, and that's the general public. We need to get more experience under our belt now. We can do pilots all day long, but these would be real live pilots that would give us the additional data that are important. And then I'll leave you with this before my question. You know, we have to get back to technology and look what's happening out there. And I don't know if I texted this to you or not. I think I did to Steve and to Lucy. But after we had a meeting a month ago or so in your office, just lo and behold, there was a commercial I was watching during the news one night, and it was somebody, some of you may have seen this, a car pulls up to the gas pump, and I think it was a Visa commercial. And it talked about how the new telematics, and I think it was Hyundai, I can't remember the auto manufacturer, The telematics built into the vehicle allowed you to basically pay for your gas right there at the pump without getting out of the, you pump the gas and you go. My goodness, ladies and gentlemen, the technology is already happening. All we have to do, to follow my friend Lee's points, is to make sure privacy is in place. What Terry brings to the table with the technology perspective is to make sure that that's there. But it's happening today. It wouldn't take too much more technologically to have the mileage that was driven since the last time that vehicle was filled in that manner, transmitted as part of the system, and at the same time they pay for the gas, they're paying for their miles. This is the piece that I feel is missing from all of our efforts and should be a huge priority now. And in fact, my question was, when is your research going to be completed? And is that something that we would be able to talk about at our meeting in April, which we currently have on the books? Do you have a timeline on when Caltrans is going to have that back?
We'll hear more from Lauren and Stephen on the status of research. But,
Okay.
So they'll have a better update than I can give you right now.
So then lastly, and I will say this again, and I know right now we have Caltrans is doing some stuff, and then the commission through the legislation is tasked with things, including this effort. And it might be better, whether it's housed at the Transportation Commission, housed under your offices, as a separate departmental activity. This is something that I believe is going to require a multifaceted effort, not just what this technical advisory committee brings to the table, but we need to see the Department of Finance in the room, the state auditor, the DMV, Caltrans, every function within state government that we believe is touched by this program moving forward should be established as a task force or a department under your control that will actually focus on this to capture what's going on out there and to bring in those auto manufacturers that are already doing this and see what can we do. Lastly, at Mabufa a couple of years ago, the thing that inspired me on pay at the pump, which is why we got into that FAST Act thing, the 2015 FAST Act, was just how simple it is. They talked about, and don't quote me on this number, but I think I remember something less than 200,000 gas stations around the country, the whole United States. And it seemed to be a lot easier to convert those gas stations than it was all that we went through with the 30 or 40 some odd million registered vehicles that are in the state of California. And we were talking the whole country there. So there's things that we ought to be looking at now. And I know we took a little bit of a break because of SB 1 and the dust up with Prop 6, but that's behind us now. And I do think now is the time. And again, I'll just conclude by saying, as the former chair of this group, how proud I am to have you here today, to see this group all together and to see your enthusiasm. And I think there's a lot to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. You touched upon a lot of areas and all good points. On telematics, I will say this definitely holds great promise for the future. At the same time, telematics is an area that has implications beyond road charge. And having spent some time in the auto industry, and same with my colleague Laurie, I will say that when it comes to a potential telematics standard, that could very well be better handled at the national level, either with the federal government or a national industry group or trade group. I don't know, and I'm being very candid, I don't know that the auto industry would be amenable to a proposed standard by the state of California. This has to be done at the national level. And so, again, this is going to take a lot more due diligence and looking into. Again, telematics has great promise, and I think you're right, we ought to be pursuing it in some way.
Just a very quick follow-up. Yeah. They hated the OBD2 port as well, but the state of California made it a requirement through ARB, through CARB, and then all of a sudden it became a standard. So I do agree that auto manufacturers, and we met with them early on, they are not excited about anything that we touch on their vehicles. But this state is a big fish and has the ability to lead, and I'm not willing to wait for the federal government because I don't think they'll be there as quickly as this state can move.
Speaking of OBD2 ports, I should mention to all of you that I recently signed up for pay by the mile auto insurance for the Hyundai, for the fuel cell vehicle I drive. So the device is plugged into the OBD2 port. It was really difficult to find. It was almost impossible. It was underneath the steering wheel, close to the brake pedal. It was it was very difficult. It took a while to find it, but now it's plugged in and miles are tracked, and so I'm happy to be a guinea pig to test the integration of pay-by-the-mile insurance with a road charge program.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm going to watch our time now. We have member Mark Antonio, Benzel, and Poitras. Mark Antonio.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Chair. I'll be brief. Thank you for being here, Secretary Kim. I just wanted to go back to a comment you made earlier about SB1 is not enough, and I'm looking forward to that discussion. But I want to bring it back to conversations we've been having from the beginning, which is, should the amount of the road charge be calibrated so as simply to replace an amount that's not enough? And in particular for low-income transit-dependent travelers, it's not enough to fund the transit operations needs, much less the capital needs. But particularly the operating needs are not getting met. So I appreciate that. I look forward to that discussion, and I look forward to sort of thinking about the consequences of that for calibrating the amount of the charge.
Member Benzel, did you have your? No, I'm fine. You're good. Okay. Mr. Poitras.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In regards to the road charge issue, I'm looking at it from a little bit different perspective. Number one, it's important, for us, like with SB1, to increase revenues and road charge, to look for ways to fix our infrastructure. But I represent the San Joaquin Valley, and there were some recent studies done showing the wealth gap in California, and it's something like, from the top earners in the state compared to the bottom earners of the state, is something like 30-1. And the vast majority of the wealthier folks would be in your metropolitan areas and Bay Area, Southern California, and so forth. And certainly people know that it's there's a huge income issue or lack of income issue in the San Joaquin Valley. So saying that, lower income people are bearing the brunt of gas taxes. It's kind of like carrying it on your shoulders, because they're the ones least able to afford cars, hybrid cars, Teslas, things of that sort. I don't know a lot of people in Madera that drive Teslas, that can afford $80,000 to $100,000 to $120,000 vehicles. There's a lot of people there who drive pickups, families. They have large families, vans, things of that sort, that might get 15 to 20 to 25 miles per gallon, because that's what they can afford. So I look at, and we have something like 5 million people living in the San Joaquin Central Valley area, which is roughly 15% of the population of Santa California. So I look at the road charge as being more of an equalizer, in terms of everybody pays their fair share, rather than the brunt of gas tax falling on the poorer areas of the state. It seems like there's a lot of policies that we adopt here in the state that a lot of people in the wealthier areas can afford, but the consequences is that the people in other parts of the state can at least afford them, have to pay these fees, and as a consequence of the regulatory environment. And again, that wealth gap continues to grow and grow. And so this is one area I think that we could level the playing field and bring some equity, at least in transportation.
Thank you for raising that. And one of the advantages of a road charge is that you can design it in a way to take into consideration family income, vehicle type, the weight of a vehicle, so it's almost like dynamic pricing. And so that's something you can do that a gas tax or a sales tax cannot do. Those are regressive in nature. So a lot of advantages with a road charge, for sure.
Director Weiss, and then Mr. Finnegan.
Thank you. I just want to piggyback on something that you had said that was key was about the transition. And maybe it would benefit us to look a little bit back at a much smaller transition that the state made, and Eric and I were talking about a little bit about I think about 20 years ago, and I think Stephen Keck probably remembers this later, in weight fees, in order to get the commercial vehicle registration, the way it was charged in California was not consistent with how it was charged elsewhere, and there was a international agreement, and so California had to change the way they charge the commercial vehicles. There was some kind of revision that provided for an adjustment, I believe, in the rates, because the idea was it was supposed to be net zero and it didn't quite work out right, so they had to be increased a couple years later. But that may be something to look at to how was that set up and how that worked, and was there some lessons that could be learned if anyone's still around who remembers that.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Finnegan.
Thanks so much. I think it was Lauren Kay who asked about the policy issues that are at stake. I think some of those have just bubbled up in the last few comments. And I think these are really important questions. And I'll keep it really brief, but when this whole process started, the idea was a replacement to the gas tax, sort of dollar for dollar, a new method. And it wasn't about increasing revenue necessarily, at least in the short term. And it wasn't about all these other things. I've advised the group over the years, and I just wanted to share this since you're here, Mr. Secretary, is that many things are possible with a road charge. However, layering on a bunch of things, whether it's based on it by income or vehicle type or other factors, my view is that would, at least it was some years ago, that was my view, and I think I still have this, is layering on all those things at the beginning was probably the death knell for this whole exercise. Too complicated, too many hot button issues that'll come up. So I think we just have to be cautious about that. Anything is possible, but the amount that'll be charged is a huge policy issue. How those funds will be used is a huge policy issue, and any variables that we want to layer in as well. And on the issue of weight, I'll just remind everybody that it makes no difference the impact a vehicle has on the road until it exceeds about 10,000 pounds. So for your basic private passenger vehicles, weight doesn't make a difference on road impact.
Very good. Excellent. Colleagues, any other comments or questions? We've had you on the hot seat here, Mr. Secretary, and I just love this. This is awesome, but a really solid discussion. I would just share with you, I think I made a little bit of faux pas where I should have had the members of the committee introduce themselves and their areas of expertise. I think you got that from the nature of the comments of folks, but Eric, if you would introduce yourself, because you did not speak, and let the Secretary know your area of expertise.
Well, congratulations, and thank you for being here today. And I know we have a meeting coming up with you in a couple of weeks, so thank you for taking the time to meet with us. Eric Sauer, Senior Vice President of the California Trucking Association. We've been involved since the inception of this group. We also worked with this group and others to support a pilot program that included commercial vehicles. And so we did a small sample size of commercial vehicles that were involved in the pilot program. I think the results, were fair, and the people that participated were interested in something like this, but I think we collectively worked on making something like that more option-based for the commercial vehicle industry. So I appreciate the participation and the perspective that everybody around this table has been providing over the last 5 years, and thanks again for being here today.
Eric, I know many of your ATA colleagues in Washington, so I look forward to working with and getting to know you and Sean and the rest of your team.
Thank you.
And Mayor Ornelas, would you like to just say hello and a little bit of your expertise, why we love having you at the table here?
Okay, so my name is Susan Ornelas. I'm representing the rural part of town. I mean, you're rural part of the state from Northern California. The part we're really in Northern California.
Exactly.
So
I know.
Yeah. Anyway, since I'm bothering to speak, I did feel that as I was reviewing some of the material from the last couple of years, I felt that we've a little bit rolled over the concept that, rural people have older cars, that they will always pay more gas tax and things like that. That's that's kind of choosing a type of person, and I don't find that to be true in my area anyway. It's a little bit different than the Central Valley. So there's a part of me that's wanted to just put this out, and I know it's problematic because we're trying to protect information, but I thought that this possibly, like in my area, this is not a popular idea. Everyone just thinks it's the government trying to get into the other pocket. Right. That's the way it's perceived. And I tell people about the electric cars, and only that will get them like a little angry at somebody else, and then they want to charge them. Exactly. So that's about the way it goes at this point. So I was thinking that possibly, if this could work out and still, face the information data collection situation, that maybe we could have different prices for different regions. Because as I was driving down here even, like on 101, there was there's a few cars, but it was not traffic until we hit the Bay Area. And then it was thick traffic. And so, I know we're not really trying to do congestion pricing here necessarily, but it would sell better in our area if, say, we're talking about, I know we haven't settled on a price, but say we're saving 1.7 cents a mile or something. Let's say in our area it was a penny. So then we would feel, oh, good, that is acknowledged that, because we go from somewhere to, people maybe drive the same distances in cities, but maybe not. I'm not completely sure about that. Maybe that's something Caltrans could look at. But I just thought that possibly could help at least the rural area that I'm representing be able to accept this idea. So that's just a thought I wanted to bring
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor. And then our public member, Pam O'Connor, but comes as past mayor of Santa Monica, Southern California Association of Government representative. And by the way, we are trying to look at congestion pricing in Southern California even as we speak right now. So it's kind of an interesting comment of
But we thought we'd pilot in your area.
We wanted to pilot, right. Very, very good. Pam, any thoughts that you'd like to just share?
Hi. So I originally was appointed to this committee representing metropolitan planning organizations, and I still have the association with SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments. And as SCAG was one of the first, I think in the state, to put a road charge into their RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, back in 2012, and it's still moving forward with that. So just want to let you know that the MPOs of the state, certainly in Southern California, are active on this and continuing to work on this and supportive. But again, it's an ongoing, because new people come in to the organization, people come in, people go out, so there's an ongoing education component. And sharing, as your agency and this group is doing the research, I think it is going to be important for us to reach out to the MPOs throughout the state and keep them updated on this kind of information. And again, those local legislators, those local council members and county supervisors, making sure that we continue to educate and inform them and keep them moving forward with us.
Completely agree.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, we've kept you on your feet too long, and our agenda is, we're going to try to stick to our timing on our agenda, but we really thank you very much for being here. You can see why, on a personal level, I cherish every one of these people, from social equity to privacy to trucking to public members to local government in small areas, big areas, local government. You have such a great resource here, and true believers like Mr. Medaffer that we have to kind of like rein in sometimes. But he's right 99.9% of the time, so just be careful of him. I really do appreciate you taking the time to meet with us all today and share the vision, and I would encourage you to use us. This is a great group that has a good working relationship, and so again, thank you for your time very, very much for sharing. I know we have more to discuss, but any last thoughts or?
No, thank you, Madam Chair, for bringing all of us together, and I see the strength, the diversity of this group. All of you bring unique perspectives, so I look forward to working with you and continuing the dialogue both today and in future meetings. So thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, moving us right along now, we're back to Mitch Weiss, and he's going to introduce our new California Transportation Commission staff.
Well, I'm sure all of you have already emailed Hannah, but I want to introduce Hannah Walter. She started with the commission in September of 2019 and has been managing the road charge program since then. More recently, we've added the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program to her portfolio. I've been really impressed with how quickly she's come up to speed on both of these and really making a valuable contribution. So I'm happy to have her on board. Previously, she was an executive policy advisor at the Department of Water Resources and had experience doing research, developing policy, and working on large water management projects. We've also brought on Norma Ortega as a retired annuitant to consult on road charge issues on an as-needed basis. Most of you know Norma. She served as Caltrans' road charge manager when she was the CFO there prior to her retirement.
Thank you. And Stephen Keck from Caltrans, will you introduce your new team members?
I certainly will have more to introduce. So I think you might be aware, since our last meeting, we have had a complete turnover in staff in the road charge areas at Caltrans. So I wanted to introduce our three new staff here today. First is Lauren Priota here to my right, sitting behind the podium, probably can't be seen on camera. Lauren is the new program manager taking over for Carolyn Porvahidi, who retired shortly after our last TAC meeting. She's been on board since September and has really taken on the challenge of getting up to speed with this vast body of information that we are all fortunate to kind of already be involved in. She comes to us from our Legislative Affairs Office in Caltrans, where she's been for many years, but she also comes to us with experience in other states and at the national level in Washington, D.C. So she comes with a lot of great contacts and experience in dealing with legislators, which we will definitely need as we move forward. Also, I want to recognize in the audience over here Carolyn Plummer, who is, I think, in her third week now as a manager in the road charge program. Carolyn previously worked also for me in the Division of Budgets, where she managed the resources of the most important division at Caltrans. And she's really looking forward to getting to participate in this program now. And then the veteran is Conrad Shigimoto sitting next to her. So Conrad has been with the road charge program exactly 1 week longer than Lauren has. He started in late August. Conrad, thank you very much for keeping us together. We almost had a period where there was nobody left in the program just because of the turnover and how it happened. But this team is going to be joined by one more. We're in the process of hiring the final and fourth person, and we'll be laser focused on just this one issue. This team is focused just on road charge. And so as we build that team back together, they're working together and we'll have this singular focus. I did want to bring something that's not necessarily related to staffing, and that is the administration will not be renewing the resources dedicated to road charge program with the next budget cycle, but we have decided this is such an important area for us to continue research in. We're absorbing that workload within my division of budgets, one of my 4 divisions, and so we're going to continue to support this work with these dedicated staff.
Is that a signal of something, Stephen?
No, not a signal of the administration's desires and goals, more of a desire to be as efficient as we can be.
Got it. Thank you for absorbing. Thank you. Okay. Very good. Appreciate that, and welcome aboard, all of you. We hope that we can all coordinate well together. Thank you very much. All right, now we're ready for our first presentation from Caltrans, but before we start, do you need a comfort break? Because this is about 40 minutes in. Would you like a little break, or you want to just plow through? Thoughts? And just, if you need to go, you need to go. We're all good. Gosh. All right, we're good. So we're going to welcome now Lauren Priota from Caltrans to give us an update on their current road charge demonstration and on the application they plan to submit in April to Federal Highway Administration. And they're also going to talk about disadvantaged community focus groups, how that went, and about a contract they have with UC Berkeley. So how about all that?
All right.
Welcome.
Well, good morning. Thank
Good
you,
morning.
Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members. Again, my name is Lauren Verhoda, and I'm the manager of the Road Charge Program at Caltrans, and it's really exciting to be with you here today for the first time. Stephen did introduce my staff, but I do want to point out really quickly, we have Mike Warren over here from WSP, who is heading up our current demonstration project and the team there. So glad he could be with us today as well, so feel free to corner him afterwards with tons of technical questions. He's ready. With that, I'm going to dive right in because we have lots of interesting things to cover about what Caltrans is working on right now, 4 separate projects, and some stuff that we're going to be moving ahead on as well, and stuff that we want your input on. So, Caltrans and California in general has done a lot of research already. You guys know this much better than I do because, I have 5 months and you have 5 years, so you've been there. But we've accomplished a lot both individually and through RecWest. In addition, other states are doing things. We've been, as the Secretary mentioned, working in the process of pulling together kind of a research scan and pulled together over 500 different items of research, policy documents on different aspects of road charge policy. So there's a lot out there, and it's really exciting. Building on specifically the work that we've done in California, we started a new demonstration project, which we kicked off last July, which is utilizing Federal Surface Transportation System Funding Alternatives grant funds. And it hits all but 2 of the recommendations that came out of the final report in 2017 that the department and the TAC were crucial in pulling together. This demonstration has 4 different phases. We're kind of referring to it as our phase demonstration project. And the goal of this project is to really look at some emerging technologies and how they could potentially partner in collecting a road charge. The spirit of this is easiness. How can we make it as easy as possible for the user to pay their road charge? And to that end, the first technology that we're looking at is that direct recommendation from the 2017 report of looking at pay at the pump, and can we imitate the current experience that people don't even realize they're paying the gas tax by collecting a road charge at the pump or at the charge point. The second technology we're looking at is usage-based insurance. As previously discussed, more and more people are signing up for pay-as-you-drive type options with their insurance company. So can we partner with that if they're already collecting mileage, that it simply becomes a line on your insurance bill? Third, TNCs. If you're taking an Uber ride, you already have a breakout of local states and taxes. Can we just do a breakout of a road charge as well? And then finally, autonomous vehicles, clearly an emerging field in the transportation sector. How can we partner with that technology in the collection of a road charge? So this is our project timeline, and the key points on this are the kickoff of the live demonstration will be in January of next year and run about 6 months, and the final report is due in summer of 2022. My plan today is to walk through some of these key tasks and what our plans are for some of those, such as the technical design and the business case and things like that. All of these tasks are really driven by a research-based approach. We'll be looking at things that are on the overarching road charge goals and programs, but also how the transportation markets for each of these 4 technologies affect road charge and potentially interact. And a lot of this will be shaped by our upcoming research workshop that we're going to be having in March. And if there are some of you who would be interested in attending that, we would love to have you. Currently, we're looking at some potential dates in March, the 18th, the 30th, or the 31st. But if there is real interest on your part and those dates don't work, please let us know, because we're very flexible and we want to make that opportunity available to you to participate. So communications is a key task of this demonstration. This is a topic that requires ongoing education of the public. And there's some concern that with the recent SB1 push that there is some transportation funding fatigue out there right now. So we really need to be thoughtful in our education efforts. So through this demonstration, we'll be performing public opinion polling, focus groups and surveys to make sure that we are capturing good data about where people are right now, attitudinal and experiential data. We also have some great examples out there right now. Oregon has been doing some great outreach work right now. Hawaii, with their pilot, has put some really exciting things together. So there's a great body of work for us to consider and learn from and build on, and we'll be doing some of that through this project. Risk analysis. So as we progress through this project, we will be building on and expanding our existing risk registries. This will be focused both on this specific project as well as the risk associated with the California Road Charge Program as a whole, as we go through in different cycles and market advancements, what kind of things do we need to manage. We'll also be updating the business case for road charge. Obviously, we need to make sure that this makes financial sense for the state. We'll update the previous work to create a comprehensive business case, but we'll also be looking at road charge integrated with the 4 emerging technologies that we're looking at. And this will cover things like the operating costs, potential points of leakage, collection costs, enforcement costs, registration, et cetera. And we'll be identifying some potential trends in the transportation markets and how they might impact road charge directly or indirectly. On the evaluation, the evaluation of the first pilot gave some great ideas for further investigation and issues that needed to be investigated. And a lot of those things are being studied through this current demonstration project. So we plan to build off of that same approach to evaluate this demonstration. We'll look at the criteria from the original pilot. We'll also look at market trends and risk to see if there's any new criteria that we need to consider. And we'll be looking for assistance from the TAC this fall to finalize and develop those evaluation criteria before the pilot goes live. The strategy that we'll be doing will consist of things like documentation reviews, team interviews, performance assessments, public and participant opinion polls, and surveys and focus groups. For the technical design of this project, obviously, key to the success is a good technical design. So on this slide is some of the documents we'll be developing, the concepts and things we'll be working through in order to collect the necessary data from these different technologies. But we'll also be establishing a data repository and processing warehouse to capture, analyze, and report on sanitized road charge data from each of the 4 technology platforms, as well as other potential transportation data sources. So this analytical platform is called Platform for Road Charge Innovation and Mobility Evolution, or PRIME, which is what I call it because it's a lot easier to say. With PRIME, this demonstration will not only test technology that's collecting the road charge, but it's also going to explore whether sanitized data that we receive from these technologies can improve operations and planning in the state. Data from each of the 4 phases will be transmitted to a cloud-based data warehouse, and we can add in external sources such as ARB data, emissions data, ITS data, travel activity, tolling data, et cetera. If there's a data set out there, we can plug it in. PRIME will be exploring how demonstration data can be connected through a single platform and integrated securely with other public and private data sets to provide real-time analytics and performance dashboarding. These dashboards will allow Caltrans and other agencies to make data-driven decisions, conduct predictive forecasting and enhance modeling, enhance asset management, and improve network operations. All data uploaded to PRIME will be sanitized of any personally identified information. It will comply with the latest security and encryption standards. There will be an independent security audit of all data warehouses, transfer protocols, encryption standards, systems, and processes. As we prepare for the demonstration going live this fall, we'll be focusing on recruiting participants, testing, and auditing the systems beforehand. Across the 4 phases, we will have a total of about 100 to 150 participants. This demonstration project is focusing much more on the technical feasibility of collecting through these technologies, so the large number of participants we had in the first pilot was not as much of a priority. We'll be doing a dry run with an end-to-end systems testing across each phase and prime before we go live, and that will include onboarding, account sign-up, use case testing, administrative reporting, prime analytics, and financial reporting. And this dry run will be done by WSP staff and Caltrans staff. And if any TAC members would like to participate in it as well, we would love to have your assistance in running through those tests. As we go live with the demonstration, it'll be supported by constant monitoring and custom support. I'm told that Mike himself will be handling the phones, so he's definitely all in on this one. Continual reporting will be provided as we go through about the 6-month period. And once we're completed, the results will be analyzed, reviewed, and the final report will be out in 2022. Partnering with this demonstration, we are doing some work with a key issue that's both recommended in the final report as needing further research and as a key recommendation from this TAC, and that is further research on how road charge impacts rural and disadvantaged communities. So we'll be partnering with UC Berkeley's Institute of Transportation Studies and Dr. Susan Shaheen to conduct independent research on the impact to disadvantaged and rural residents. And this is really designed as a supplement to our demonstration project. In the first phase, this will really center on an online general population survey of about 3,500 residents across 4 regions of the state, and it'll be teasing out travel behavior and sensitivity of demand. As it moves into phase 2, Berkeley will actually have access to demonstration participant data to compare attitudinal information to experiential data captured before, during, and after the demonstration. And this will provide identifying potential sensitivities to the technology platforms, pricing structures, and the overall effectiveness of our communications. Results will be coupled with the demonstration evaluation results to identify potential trends and outliers and root causes for trend changes. On top of that, we're missing a slide there, I think. Okay. We also have a contract with the Foundation for California Community Colleges, which is looking specifically at communicating with disadvantaged communities. We've already held some focus groups in Sacramento and LA. We have another set of focus groups coming up in Fresno on March 3rd. If any of you are interested in attending those, please let me know. We're happy to have you watch the discussion. In addition, we'll be having an online discussion board February 26th to 28th. If you are interested in getting access to watching that discussion, if you could let me know, I do need to know by next Wednesday, and I just need your name and email, and we can get you hooked up to watch what's going on in that discussion. And finally, we'll have an online survey of about 1,600 participants. The report on this effort will be out by this June. And lastly, we are working with the state of Oregon on an interoperability pilot through RUCWest. This will test a central clearinghouse model that could be used to sort out both collections and payments in a multi-state system. Oregon is the lead state on this, and I think right now it's going through their procurement process. So those are the 4 current things that we have going on. And what I want to talk about now is where we're going and what we're thinking about moving forward with. So this is Caltrans' work plan over the next 3 years. And we're currently in this first stage of wrapping our minds around the existing body of research. As mentioned, the Secretary directed us to do a research scan to see what's out there and really understand the foundation of work that has been done in this nation on road charge. even just here in California, obviously, there's a fantastic foundation of work that's been done through the leadership of folks like Norma Ortega and Carrie Perfahidi, and all the work that the TAC has done through the original pilot. And as I mentioned previously, as we've been doing this research scan, we have collected, I think, about 550 different items of research on different topics, from academia to policy organizations, that we're trying to absorb and analyze a bit. So I think, as the Secretary alluded, this foundation, we're trying to understand where it is. So we're feeling around the edges of that so we can understand where we want to build next. So the research workshop that we're having in March will help us pivot to our next stage of identifying those key unanswered questions. As the Secretary mentioned, we know there are gaps, but we're trying to be really thoughtful in identifying them and planning for them. So as we move into the second half of the year, we'll be developing a research plan to answer those questions that we identify, and we'll be bringing that back to the TAC in the fall as we develop it to get your input on it. So that's kind of where we are, what we're currently working on, and where we're going. But we do have an upcoming opportunity that we also need to address. The last round of the Federal Surface Transportation System funding alternative grants is in this April. The good news is the program is likely to continue. I was in DC in January talking with congressional staff about the reauthorization that they're putting together, and there was some great support for road charge on both sides of the aisle. So it looks like there's a very strong chance that the program will continue. In addition, as you mentioned, they are looking at potentially a national pilot on road charge. If you look at the current language in the Senate version, it's a little bit vague at this point, looking at, okay, what does the national pilot look like? But one thing I do really like about it does establish an advisory council for that national pilot that includes both industry, state DOTs, academia. And I think a lot of us states pushed for that, working through MBUFA, to address that concern of, is the federal pilot just going to reinvent just go down roads that states have already looked at. So we want to make sure that it's useful, drawing on the information that states have done before, and not just starting from scratch. So that is encouraging, but ultimately we don't know when that bill is going to be getting through Congress. So April might be our last opportunity for a little while. So we're looking for some input on some ideas that Secretary Kim is considering putting forward for that round of grants. And I believe you were provided with a summary of that. Briefly, I'll go over the two options that we have put out there. And both of these are really, the aim of these proposals is to both test something technical, but also engage with a community that's uniquely impacted by road charge. So the first option that we have put out there is testing whether or not we can actually differentiate between public and private roads. This is a technical issue that will affect a lot of different funding options potentially in California, but it also really can impact the rural and agricultural community. And this could potentially be an opportunity to really engage that community in what does a road charge look for you, how does this impact you, and have both that technical exploration but also a conversation with this community of how this might work. The second option is engaging the trucking industry in how road charge uniquely impacts them and what appropriate rates could look like. It would pilot the collection of several different rate structures, so both the state and industry would have actual data on how this played out and might meet their own goals. So that's kind of what we have for you guys right now for your input. Thanks again. I'm so pleased to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to many more really interesting meetings. But with that, I'm going to leave the balance of time to take questions and see what thoughts you have on these proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, a lot of information and a lot of fast presentation and density in those slides. So yeah, I'm glad we got a chance to take a look at them ahead of time. Member Sauer. Jump
Eric
in.
Sauer, California Trucking Association. Is there any other details or concepts that you're looking into as far as obviously the commercial trucking?
Details in
grant?
terms of what this proposal would
Yeah,
look
like a little bit more information.
Right.
Like conflicts with interstate commerce, and is this just specifically for California-based
Right.
fleets and whatnot? Because that's somewhat of a competitive disadvantage for California-based fleets.
Right. So this is the idea that we
And I got to
have-
thread the needle real nice and tight on this one. So.
Right. We have discussed it a little bit with Ruck West because we think it could be an interesting regional thing as well. So that's a possibility. I think that there's a lot of different nuances that we could potentially do in this pilot. And again, what the information that's been provided to you, these are just a concept right now. Will be developed once the secretary decides what he wants to move forward with in the beginning of March. We'll be full on into getting into the meat of developing that proposal, so it's ready by April. So this is one of the reasons why we'd like to know what would you like it to be, but
Or not.
yeah, or not.
Yeah.
So and I have had some discussions. The I-95 Corridor Coalition on the East Coast has a pilot right now where they have done some stuff with the trucking industry, looking at IFTA and how that could potentially work as a road charge thing. When I talked to them, they said one of the things that they would be interested about is. California being such a big state, we would have a lot of internal freight movement as well that might not be subject to IFTA. So how would that work? Also, looking at a potential Ruck West aspect, how would we work out moving to Oregon with their weight mile fee? What would that look like? But ultimately, for me, what inspired this idea was Penske recently joined MBUFA, saying that we see road charge moving forward and we want to be at the table to discuss how this looks in the future. And I thought, if someone wants to be at the table, I want to create a table to sit down and say, what is this going to look like? What are your needs? What are our needs? Because I think the trucking industry is. Commercial vehicles are unique. They aren't the same as passenger vehicles. They're different issues. And so different issues may apply. And so I think that's a useful conversation to have.
Yeah, and Penske, the difference between the Penskes and the normal rank and file trucking companies are, company-owned trucks. And so obviously it's a little bit different of the mechanics of leasing trucks as opposed to owning and the commercial vehicles. So,
right. Yeah. But again, digging into those nuances, what's fair, what kind of needs does the trucking industry have?
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this before where an optional type of program may or may not work, and I don't know if it does or doesn't, but it may work for certain applications in the industry and it may not. And so one size fits all is just something that concerns us. So.
Very good. Mr. Finnegan, then Mr. Marcantonio.
Thanks. I wonder if you could elaborate briefly a little bit further on the usage-based insurance element of this. Is that, where is it at? Who are you working with? And is that sort of conforming to Proposition 103 requirements in the Department of Insurance, or are you looking at it mostly from a mileage tracking / billing convenience aspect?
Right. So I believe in California it's simply a pay for how much you drive, not how you drive. So they're collecting that mileage already, just the number of miles. So that's what we're focused on is you're already collecting the mileage. So let's apply the rate, collect it.
And are you working with somebody on that or some entities?
Yes. Sorry, let me look at my notes here. I think our subcontractor on that is, hold on. Is it
In the interest of time, how will we get back to you with that information?
Right.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it's Mile Auto is our partner on UBI.
Very good. Mr. Marcantonio, then Ms. Benzel.
Thanks so much for the presentation. And I really appreciate the work you'll be doing with UC Berkeley to identify the unanswered questions around disadvantaged communities. I'd love to check in with you offline. I don't want to take our time about how you're defining disadvantaged communities. So that would be great. But I'd also wanted to build off of Supervisor Poitras's point to say that there's not just a geography of disadvantage. There's here's the example that I really wanted to bring up is the people who live in the Central Valley but work in the Bay Area who are driving enormous distances. And I've recently been talking to the presidents of the ATU locals that represent the bus drivers in the East Bay and the BART workers. They drive enormous distances, and then they come to work and they drive all day here. So that's an issue of equity that I would love if that you could be also identifying unanswered questions around those those populations.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Benzel, then Mr. Tian.
Thank you very much for your presentation and the work your team is doing. I just want to clarify and make sure I fully understand what I'm seeing here is you talks about demonstration and demonstration phases, but when I look at the schedule slide, the actual demonstration with real people involved in it is only 2 quarters in 2021.
Right, it's about 6 months in the first half of next year.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. Okay, and then could you remind me again this meeting in March and the dates and the topics again?
Right, so we'll be having a research workshop in March, which will be both specific to some of the tasks that we need to do in this project, but also as a program overall, helping us switch from studying the research that we've done, collected under the research scan, and moving into, okay, what questions do we need, what are the questions that we have, the gaps? So it's both project specific and program specific. So the dates we are currently looking at are March 18th, 30th, or 31st. But again, if those dates are not workable for people, we can look at other options.
In Sacramento? Or?
They will be in Sacramento, yes.
Right. And then probably as
Laura,
part
I'm
of,
sorry. What's a research workshop?
Excellent question. So I think the goal that we will be having with it will be sitting down with WSP, our contractor, and their team to work through, okay, what are the tasks, what are the markets that we're engaged in, what research do we still need to do to inform this project, but also start looking at the overall program research and seeing what else we might need to do. So we'll be sitting down for a couple of hours, it'll be about a half day, and talking through what we need to do really to move forward and to make sure that each of these tasks are supported and informed.
I'm sorry, Ms. Benson.
yes. So something that's stirring inside me through the discussion this morning, for Chairperson Dunn or perhaps for Secretary Kim, is I'm wondering if it's time to think about a subcommittee of this committee on privacy. The recent passage of CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act on privacy, will bring in more complications.
Yes.
So I think Lee and I've always brought in security and privacy, as a technological issue and from our own professional experience, but we've now introduced a new level of regulation. And so, Lee and I sit here and listen to these things and shudder a little bit. I mean, I'm a huge advocate for getting this going quickly, but I'm beginning to believe we're going to need to pull out some people to do some deep digging. I mean, even the discussion of the work with Berkeley, Lee and I said, I assume that's gone through an IRB approval process and human subject
all human
research.
subjects, right?
Yes,
So-
but yes. But perhaps at some point,
Very good.
Chairperson Dunn, we might want to think about a subcommittee to dig into the privacy and
Thank
security
you.
issues.
Thank you. It's a good comment, and certainly probably should be raised at the research workshop.
Absolutely, and I would say that one thing that we're already thinking about is looking at the California Consumer Privacy Act and seeing, okay, how does this work for road charge? Are there any gaps? Are there any tweaks that need to be made? So already, yes,
you.
further research there.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Tian, thank you.
Yeah, so Terry said about half of what I was going to say, but I'm looking at all the things that are inputs to this, and so every time that I hear an input, I'm going, so has this input actually been adequately screened from a privacy perspective? So for example, Steve talked about what's the role of UBI. Obviously, in the state of California, under Prop 103, there are some significant legal limits to what insurance companies can base their premiums on, which is different from what they may be collecting in their telematics devices. We have, of course, been talking to people like Cambridge Mobile Telematics, who OEM all sorts of hardware dongles for all sorts of devices in cars, and we know that they're collecting a hell of a lot more data than what data is allowed to be used actuarial and in California. So, for instance, that immediately raised the question of, so are you guys, when you're absorbing UBI type data or telematics data, are you including all of that data that is highly individualized? I mean, how are they've got amazing now accelerometer data from the phones, because the phones are currently the most, those are the things that technologically innovate the fastest, right? It's faster to innovate phone technology than it is to innovate cars, because people keep their cars for a little longer than they keep their phones. And so, we see all of these advances in collection and the sensors that are involved, and my organization would be very concerned about what you're sucking up. ALPR data is another example, right? This is an area that, we think already raises all sorts of constitutional issues for the government to collect that kind of data, and cases like Carpenter suggest that there are in fact reasonable expectations of privacy involved. And so we want to make sure, I'm concerned that once a project like this gets used to ingesting mass quantities of highly individualized data, that we will never be able to actually make sure that an operational program is honoring the privacy concerns of people. So I just wanted to sort of bolster Terry's point that this is something that we sort of have to face forward now. Even with the UBI example, one of the hardest things as we're trying to work on the legislature is that, while CCPA is a legal framework, the insurance commissioner is a legal framework, a constitutional legal framework, that the legislature can't easily always change. And there are all sorts of additional, sort of legal complications in this area. So we think it does need to get some special attention.
Right, and I agree, it is very complex, and I think that's part of the goal of looking at this, is if we were to collect some of this data, which is, particularly from autonomous vehicles, collect so much data, even just about down to tire pressure and things like that, does that create additional privacy issues that we need to address? We're looking at it to see how it might work and what things need to be dug into deeper, to make sure that it would be handled in an appropriate way, that no personal data would be compromised in any way.
Very good, thank you. Ms. Bartlett, Supervisor Bartlett. I'll get to you, Mr. Jen. I'm getting my members first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we all have concerns about the privacy and security of, especially the personal identifiable information. Instead, through the research workshop, I would recommend perhaps pulling in some of the entities out there, the transportation agencies, like the Orange County Transportation Agency, and also the Transportation Corridor Agencies. We've got a number throughout the state where they're already collecting this data and processing it for billing purposes, for enforcement, for DMV holds, and learn kind of their methodologies for what they're doing. And some of them have similar methodologies and some are different. But they all want to stay in the right lane with making sure they protect information, because there have been legal actions taken by some of the ridership and consumers out there. So I think we can learn a lot about their lessons learned and some of the policies and procedures that they have in place for the toll lanes and toll roads and express lanes that are throughout the state. And every county has got different transportation agencies where I think we can learn from that.
Very good. Thank you. Any other colleagues? Great. Mr. Jen?
Thank you. Just a quick question and then a comment. For the prime protocol, is that going to be something that each of the phases of the pilots are actually going to be implementing? And yeah, so that's my question. And then comment about the pay at the pump for electric vehicles, so pay at the charge point. One thing to probably consider is that about 80 to 85% of charging for electric vehicles happens at home. And so you're probably going to have some pretty serious leakage issues. I don't know if that's something that's been considered.
Well aware of that issue. I think again we're focusing on testing the technology, so we'll capture that good 15% in that test. But yeah, there's a policy debate. Obviously, that leakage issue exists. So again, your question is each of the 4 technologies engaging with Prime? Yes. 2 different degrees. Autonomous vehicles have much more data collected than you would probably through our pay at the pump. That one's going to be much more basic. But yes, they will all in some way be connected with Prime.
Very good, thank you. Just a couple notes from me. I just really want us to be sensitive to the fact that at least the way SB 1077 was designed, revenue neutrality is important. And so when we talk about revenue in all of these studies, I'd be really careful how you word things. We do not want to scare people off at the beginning. This is not supposed to increase revenue to the state, notwithstanding the fact that you still have to make it operable under the state. So watch wording on that one. The other one that I think never gets talked about is, and it's really personal to me, so maybe you guys don't think of it this way, but everyone wants to help with climate change, but they don't know how to do it at an individual, at a personal level. I don't want to get out of my car, but I believe in climate change, and I know we need to do this. What I love about a road charge is it gets folks thinking about those discretionary trips. It gets folks thinking about, and when you market it in terms of, are you doing your fair share to help with climate change because you have a personal ability to help. It gets folks thinking about mobility options when we know single-family car use is rising and transit use is declining. And so when you look at communications on road charge, please figure out how to wrap those messages that even you can prevent climate change. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. On a very personal level. Mm-hmm. And don't be afraid to think of it in those terms, right? So look at that. Last but not least, business knows this, and I worry about government. Do not get stuck in analysis paralysis. And you don't need 99% of the information in to make a good decision. You don't need to study everything under the sun and watch people throw stuff at you in order to make a good decision on where we should go on this. So if you want to delay, this is what you do, is you just say, please, let's have a research workshop and throw the kitchen sink at us, right? So I would really ask for your leadership and discretion in understanding the research that really helps advance climate change, mobility, revenue neutrality, great comments on privacy under new laws. Think about those things where there really is data gaps, but we're not just going down a path that leads us into not being a leader on these issues after all the good work the state has done.
Right.
And I know you know that, mm-hmm. Lauren, but just, humor me.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And it's very much true. We don't want to just be spinning our wheels just to, for me to have a job forever. We want to get something done, right?
That's
so,
right.
And I think I so appreciate the Secretary's support in saying, we're all starting out here together. We want to take a moment to see what's been in and make sure we understand it so we can understand clearly how to move forward strategically and wisely and not just waste our time.
Great, thank you. All right, colleagues, anything else? Lauren's got her hands full and dealing with all of us, and I presume that there are opportunities. You did say throughout your presentation that TAC members will be welcomed to attend if they have the time. And so we'll presume that you're going to work with CTC staff to make sure we can get out
Right.
timely information to folks.
Mhm.
That would be awesome.
Absolutely.
Great. Great. Anything else?
All right, well, thanks for letting me throw a whole lot of information at you very
That was
quickly.
great. That was great. Thank you. Yes, Garth.
Madam Chair, I just had a question. This is an action item, and I know Caltrans came before the TAC here to seek input on, I guess, the two alternatives for federal funding. Did you want the TAC to weigh in on any of those?
I have this as an information item under number 9.
Oh, I'm sorry, it is an
It
information
isn't,
item.
it is an action item.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, but if, I don't know, how would you want to handle that if Caltrans was seeking input from the TAC members on the two alternatives that Lauren briefly outlined for federal funding for the next round?
Yes, that's a good one. Do you want TAC to get involved in your request for federal funding, Stephen?
So, to be clear, we outlined very briefly two potential options that the Secretary is mulling over for submission to the SCSFA grant program, and I don't know what those initials stand for. And I think we got some valuable input, especially from Eric, with regards to how carefully we need to tread the trucking side of the aspects. This is an action item, I believe, if the board wanted to make any formal recommendations with regards to advising the Secretary.
Great. I leave this to you, Mitch. Would you like to make some formal recommendations based on what we've heard today?
I mean, I would say since they're already on his plate, I mean, I don't know that we need to necessarily weigh in. What might be more helpful are two things. The first, looking to the future, if there's going to be another round of funding, let's have a timeline where we may be able to brainstorm what are the ideas that are being considered, what are the ideas that the TAC is interested in looking at, so we can perhaps together all come to an idea of what are the things that we think are most important for the state to do. And the second, more looking backwards on the grant with organizational design and compliance and several other things, if that work is finished and if there's a report that was done, can we get that so we can distribute that to everybody so they can all take a look at and take advantage of some of the work that was done?
Absolutely. And I would just say I agree with, having more, a longer timeline to think through some ideas and everything. Unfortunately, just with the schedule and the timeline of the federal grant, we had to at least bring you a starting place, so.
Very good. Mr. Medapper?
First of all, I wasn't going to say anything, but just compliments on everything you outlined. It looks really good. With respect to the grants, I think just hearing our two privacy experts, that is an area where I believe the federal government could be very well informed with a deep dive in that area as well as to what those policies should be and how we can protect the data. I recall very vividly when we concluded our 5,000 vehicle pilot, Carrie and Norm and I would chat where we got inundated by requests from everybody from RAND to various universities that wanted that information because it's literally worth millions and millions of dollars that could be resold. And we absolutely said no, because that was what the legislation called for. And I think there should be, to the point that they made earlier, of some sort of a sub-effort. This could be something that could really be well-informed. It could benefit the entire country by looking at the privacy issues and how that could be protected. It's probably going to require some sort of legislation. It might be a federal legislation. And that's where I think it could, the DOT could benefit greatly from that. So I would encourage privacy being a piece that should be looked at.
Very good. All right. Yes, Mr. Wax.
I'd like to ask you, Madam Chairman, to clarify the point you made about revenue neutrality. My understanding was that the California trial, which is completed,
Yes.
had, according to the legislation, to be structured to be revenue neutral.
Correct.
But that's been completed.
Yes.
I'm not sure that the caveat that as we go forward, everything we look at must be structured to be revenue neutral is a requirement. And in the long run, we're certainly interested in increasing revenue as other sources decline. And in the short run, as Steve Finnegan points out all the time, we have to be careful not to load so many things on this, congestion pricing and energy efficiency and so on. But I don't know that we should constrain what we do going forward by a concern about revenue neutrality.
Yes, I concur. The issue for me was not scaring our public right out front today, but with SB1 already out there, it's just understanding the baseline that we worked on, and then recognizing, of course, that there are going to be opportunities in the future. But I appreciate you allowing me to clarify. Mr. Medafford.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I think staff could clarify at a
Yes.
future meeting, but as I recall, the legislation that Governor Brown signed that extended the TAC removed the issues of revenue restrictions. And I'd let staff give the more complex explanation perhaps at a future meeting, but it allowed that flexibility. But I am totally on board with what Mr. Finnegan has done, has said in the past. We have to be careful not to hang too many ornaments on this tree while it's being built.
Right.
I think that while LA area are looking at congestion pricing, that's something they can do on their own. But when it comes to this, we have to be very sensitive that this is designed as a replacement to a funding mechanism that was created in 1918 when everybody got 10 miles to the gallon or whatever it was, and it was all the same. But because we have this diversity now, we all recognize why we have to have a different system going forward.
The point is that it's a new architecture. It's
Correct.
a new mechanism
Correct.
by which to collect revenue. And it's flexible, and in the long run, very long run, it can be used for many different things. That's actually true of other mechanisms like tolls and gas taxes as well. The revenue can be used differently, and the tolls can be levied at different times of day and so forth. So let's focus on developing the mechanism, the tool, without leaping to the conclusion that it'll be used for a certain purpose.
Very good. Mr.
I think
Finnegan.
we're in agreement.
Yes, I think
Yeah,
we are.
I
We are in agreement.
I think we
Thank
are,
you.
and I'll put a very brief fine point on the end of this, and I appreciate Marty and Jim's comments. I think we've been focused, and I think appropriately so, on methods.
Right.
And I think that should be the main focus. Now, the policy issues will need to be addressed, absolutely. But if we put them, the cart before the horse with a bunch of policy things, I don't think we'll ever get there on method. I really don't. So I think we should be focused on method, cognizant of policy issues and possible futures. Who knows where this will go?
Very good. All right, well done. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. I'm sure we'll have 5,000 questions for you at the break here. All right, so the next thing on our agenda is, again, trying to keep us on schedule, is Hannah is going to start out with a little bit on transportation revenue projections, some work done by Caltrans and our universities here today. It's helpful to get a little bit of look at where we're going in the future to help us plan for the future. So Hannah, you want to take it from here and try to get us on track?
Okay, thank you, Chair Dunn. I'm just going to introduce the main presenters. Stephen Keck is going to start out. He's the CFO of Caltrans. Then we're going to hear from Alan Jen. He's a professional researcher at UC Davis. And then Asha Weinstein Agrawal. She's the director of, is it National Finance?
NTI is National Transportation.
Yes, thank you. At the Mineta Transportation Institute. So.
Thank you, Hannah. I will start with this very first slide. And I'm standing at the podium. I don't expect you to need to. I can't be seen off where I sit normally, which is actually to my preference. But I have two very simple slides to help set the stage for our discussion. This first one is an overview of revenues provided by the state. These are state revenues provided for transportation. The most important thing to take away from this slide is that with all the increases through SB1 and the two new taxes that we got out of SB1, the new, brand new taxes, the transportation improvement fee and the zero emission vehicle fee, more than 85% of our tax base for transportation is still based on gasoline and diesel sales in some way. 75% are directly attributable to an excise tax, a per gallon tax, and about 9% is based on the sale of diesel fuel, on the actual price paid for diesel fuel. So we are still heavily dependent, despite those two new taxes, which provide significant funding, still very, very dependent on fuel sales in this state. And the second slide is one that I know has been shared with this group before. It's been updated with the latest data, and it is one that helps tell the need for why we need to think about this. This is a chart of VMT on the orange line and gasoline, I think it's actually just gasoline sales as a proxy for all fuel sales, indexed so that they both start at the same starting point in 1994. We began to see some gaps early on in the 21st century, and we saw a much bigger gap starting with the Great Recession. That gap started to close a little bit, and we're starting to see it now widen a little bit between how far people drive and the fuel they're using to get there. This is what worries us. This gap getting larger is what's costing us money. Even just having a gap at all, whether it gets bigger or not, is costing us money every single year. That's why we need to move to a road charge. I don't think I need to hit that too much with this group. And that's it. That's my two slides. That's just setting the stage for the discussion, and I'll hand it over to Alan.
You're not going to get away that quick.
Oh, I got a question. I thought it was.
All right.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Chen, and then.
Yeah.
Oh, and you?
Microphone. Microphone.
But is this gap between VMT and consumption that we see in California, what does that look like nationally?
Yeah, it is and it might be a great question for one of our two academics, but I know for a fact that it is a lesser gap in other states, but that gap does exist in other states.
Pretty good.
Could you go back to your previous slide? And
Alan might help me there.
All right. Well, I don't want to open up too big of a can of worms.
He's got the clicker.
But
There.
but could you say anything about restrictions on what funding can be spent on? I will say, a common conversation I run into, particularly with SB1 and then even this is, well, you're collecting all that money and you're funding the bullet train, and the bullet train's a waste of money, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So out of those pockets, what gets spent on what?
Good.
How much is spent on the bullet train out of these?
I'll answer Mitch's direct question first. None of this is spent on high-speed rail. All of these revenues are protected under Article 19 of the Constitution, which in general or succinctly commits all this funding to highway transportation and to transit and rail funding. And that is traditional rail, not high-speed rail.
Very good. Okay.
If I may, I'm sorry. It's also it's limited in transit. It's public fixed guideways in counties that have had an election to allow that expenditure.
Yeah,
So
I was being succinct.
I mean, I guess I was not being succinct because I wanted to say it's more complicated and more limited than that. So you can theoretically it can be spent on intercity rail,
Right.
but not intercity rail cars, and so
Women, not.
And county roadways.
Not the cars, not
County
rolling
roadway,
stock.
county roads, if
so there.
initiative.
So in counties where they have voted for that,
Right.
so if the BART counties, I believe they all have voted for that, then they can use some of it for that. And we see some of that. There's a program the commission does called the State Transportation Improvement Program, and it gives counties flexibility to use some money for different reasons, and they have some ability.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Stephen, all transportation funding of any source, as you said, state, federal, local funds, Caltrans is about 25%, 75 local? What's the split? Caltrans funding for transportation?
State funding versus other
versus
funding?
other funding.
Oh, I don't know that new percentage since everything's changed.
Okay, I would love us to know that. So,
Yeah, I
because
would love to
most
that
folks
too.
don't realize that Caltrans doesn't really, I think, they don't really do the majority of funding of transportation unless those numbers have changed.
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you, but
That'd be
I
great.
know a source. I can get that very quickly.
That'd be awesome. Great, thank you. All right. And now, our experts.
Thank you, Chair Dunn. This isn't my slide, is it?
Okay, I'll just briefly say what this slide is. We wanted to just take some time to recognize that there are a lot of different assumptions that you need to take into account when you're projecting revenues. And so some of the things that researchers look at are population size, price of gas and fuel, the adoption rate of zero emissions vehicles, the number of vehicles on the road, VMT, and inflation. So those are some things that both Alan and Asha would have looked at when they were making assumptions for their projections.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so we have sort of different models for all of these, all of which have some level of uncertainty. Our institute specializes particularly in electric vehicles, and so we based a lot of our projections on the zero emission vehicle mandate out to 2025 and the executive order to get 5 million vehicles, electric vehicles on the road by 2030. I will say that since our initial projections, which let me see if that's, over here. So this is annual revenue just coming specifically from the combination of gasoline taxes and the zero emission vehicle fee through 2030. So I will say that the majority of this decrease that we're seeing is based on projections of fuel efficiency. That's probably the number one driver. Despite the fact that there is still going to be a pretty aggressive adoption of electric vehicles in the future, those are incremental percentages of the total market share, whereas new vehicles for fuel efficiency is going to affect all new vehicles. So you're seeing sort of the majority of the decreases, specifically with the gas tax there. I will say that since this projection was made in 2018, there have been other sources of, I think, more significant uncertainty that have been introduced that aren't necessarily captured here. And so those include uncertainty regarding what fuel efficiency is going to look like. So in regards to the national standard with CAFE, I'm sure that some of you are aware that the rollback of the CAFE standards is sort of a pending regulation that is probably going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks. And this is sort of also exacerbated by the fact that California is likely going to be pursuing their own fuel efficiency standards, and their ability to do so is going to be affected by whether or not the federal government is going to be granting a waiver for them to do so. And so those, I think, will have pretty significant effects in regards to the uncertainty related to our projections. The second big source of uncertainty is that the former governor also passed an executive order to reach carbon neutrality by 2045, and that if that ends up being projected into state regulations, that's going to require far more aggressive adoption of zero emission vehicles, even more so than the 2030 goals and the existing Zep mandate. And so that would also potentially affect these things. And so as we think about these projection revenues going forward, this particular graph that I'm showing is getting sort of affected in real time by fairly significant policy changes that are affecting very different goals. And so it's unclear to me how much folks are thinking about the specific effects on transportation revenue when it's really motivated by like climate change goals. But these will be important considerations to think about as they affect these projections.
Can I ask Chair?
Yes,
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Just about this slide. What's the assumption for Zep penetration by 2030?
Yeah, so we actually, based off of our models, are forecasting that we're going to get a little bit lower than the governor's orders. I think by 2030, it's going to be around 4.2 to 4.4 million electric vehicles, and those are based off of regression models that are looking at the trends of historical sales.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, the revenue numbers, are they adjusted for inflation? You may have mentioned that, but is it just straight numbers without any adjustment for inflation?
Yeah, so these are real dollars. In terms of inflation, because the new gas tax is indexed to inflation, we are not sort of creating a gap between the inflation that you see normally and the revenues of the actual fuel tax.
I was just asking that because the costs of road construction and maintenance and so forth seems to, I don't know if that's factored in there, but it seems to grow faster than any adjustment for inflation. Thank you.
That's right. And so different types of goods and services will experience different levels of inflation. This is specifically in regards to the revenue, not in regards to the revenue's ability to meet the demands of the transportation infrastructure. And so even if we do account for inflation, you still could have a gap in the services provided.
Great. Thank you. Anything more?
No, that's all.
Great. Thank you very much. Asha.
So, by the way, I want to thank Chair Dunn and Executive Director Weiss for inviting me to be here to share some results of research that actually Marty Wax was leading. So he can, if any question is difficult, I'll just pass it right over to him. And we also had the pleasure of working with one of his PhD students at UCLA, Hannah, and I get my Hannahs confused nowadays. King, thank you. Hannah King. Clearly, if your name is Hannah, you know a lot about mileage fee revenues. So Alan actually set up what I want to share with you really well, because we also were doing projections looking at all revenues that the state of California would collect that would be spent sort of by law on transportation purposes. And we also recognized that, projecting into the future is a somewhat hand-wavy exercise, and so instead of projecting a single line, we projected these sort of clouds, which I'll explain to you in a moment. And, under different rates of inflation or vehicle fuel efficiency and gas prices, with all that changing around, what might we expect going into the future? The other thing that is unique about the couple of slides I'm showing you here is that we had presented similar work a year ago to the Transportation Commission, and Fran Inman had very sensibly said, well, but what about different rates of electrical vehicle penetration? How would that change these projections of what California is going to be raising in the future? And I said, oh, what a good question. And we went back and tried to answer that. So what you're seeing here, the yellow is essentially so we have high and low zero emission vehicle rate sort of estimates. So on the one hand, we imagined, well, how much revenue will we be collecting if we continue sort of past historical rate of increase in ZEVs, which is quite low. And so that is the yellow band up here. We call it our low ZEV adoption rate. And then we said, well, what if we meet California's target of zero emission vehicles that Jerry Brown and the legislature had set for 2030? So we have this sort of high adoption rate. What happens to revenues in that scenario? So what you're seeing here, and I have two slides, this is just revenues that are directly related to how much diesel and gas fuel you're buying. And we have these two scenarios with high and low ZEV adoption. And you'll see that, so that the yellow on the top is if we have low adoption of ZEVs, in other words, there are more gas and diesel vehicles running around. And as we go out to 2040, indeed, overall revenues collected would be higher. And I think it's something like 11 billion is the average if we have the low adoption, or actually, no, sorry. Let me Anyway, so, but one thing I actually would point out, first of all, there is overlap between those two bands. Not a lot of overlap, but there is some, even all the way out to 2040. And it's not like our gas tax revenues just go off a cliff and have, plummeted to zero. It seems likely that we would still be collecting quite a bit of revenue. The next slide I actually find equally interesting, and I don't know if anybody has noticed, the colors have flipped. So this was my original slide. Let me go here. Now, all of a sudden, that yellow band, which was the low adoption of electric vehicles, is on the bottom, and the purple, which is our high adoption rate, is on the top. This time we have added in 2 additional sources of revenue, which are the SB1. So we have the RIF, the road improvement fee, which is paid by zero-emission vehicles. It's a flat rate. And then the TIF, which is an incremental registration fee that's based on the value of the car. And a key thing to note here is that at least right now, electric vehicles are more expensive to buy than a comparative ICE vehicle. So you would be paying somewhat more in this TIF. And so what we see here is, again, first of all, lots of overlap, even out to 2040, but also we actually would be collecting more revenue, likely, if we have the high rate of adoption of zero-emission vehicles. And that is because both these vehicles are paying more in those registration fees, and of course, they're paying the annual flat rate fee that they would be paying. So let me pause there and see if there are questions or if we should just move on.
Yes, Mr. Medalfer.
Fascinating. What assumptions did you use in ZEV adoption?
So we basically took, and these are sort of spreadsheet models. They're, but we took one is basically, I think it's been 26,000 vehicles a year in California over like the last 10, 15 years has been the adoption rate, which is slow. I mean, I think it will be higher than that in the future. But we said, well, what if that just continued? It was very, very slow. And then our high adoption rate is if we meet then Governor Brown's administration's target, was it 2030? Yeah. So again, it could be even greater than that. But that was what we took as a sort of reasonable, optimistic.
Well, and the reason I was asking, Asha, is just because everything I read lately is you saw how General Motors is now converting an entire plant to 100% ZEV production. And I think we're starting to see now where before, 5, 6 years ago, it was kind of a novelty you've got a hydrogen car or you have an electric car. But now we're seeing virtually every auto manufacturer getting into the mix. Trucks even coming out, pickup trucks. It's going to keep moving, and I just don't ever want to over promise, but I'd also like to see what those models would look like on adoption, taking into consideration what each auto manufacturer might assume their sales may be changing to. Now, some of that they may not want to reveal publicly, but I think many of them recognize the fact that the train has left the station and petroleum-based, internal combustion engine vehicles are probably going by way of the dodo bird over the next 20 to 40 years. And it's just needs to make sure that we factor that in as well. I was surprised to see that the revenues stay as flat as they look. And that's why I question, are we using the right model?
Very good. Mr.
The
Kane?
key thing to...
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to respond and clarify. The TIF revenue depends on the value of the car. And so far, electric cars have high value. But if you're right, they may plunge in value, and that is one of the uncertainties in here. In order to get larger numbers of them, we might forego the revenue that is based upon the value of the car.
I will say that this was set up as a pretty simple spreadsheet model, and it would be some work, but not enormous work, to try different assumptions, different rates of prices of zero-emission vehicles or adoption rates. So
I just don't want us to be complacent.
No.
Mr. Kay?
Actually, that anticipates, I have two questions about the ZEV assumptions. So did you assume, even under both scenarios, that the price of the ZEV vehicles would be higher over time than the non-ZEV?
Yes, I believe we did.
Okay, so that's, so that biases, so that biases it upwards
wouldn't-
vis-a-vis Professor Wack's observation.
I think we're saying something similar, yeah.
I wouldn't use the word bias.
Yeah.
But I think that the income from the transportation improvement fee is very sensitive to the price of the vehicles. And if the price falls, then that would make the lower band be more accurate in terms of revenue.
Okay,
Right,
I
and
think
again-
I think I said the same thing in a very shorthand sense. And then my second question is, and I don't recall, is the $100
I know, I can never
riff.
remember. I
Is
wish-
this, is $100 ZEV fee, is that $100
Flat.
throughout?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. So that erodes over time as well?
I think though the legislation sets that it is indexed.
Oh, it does increase.
So it
Okay.
will go
So
up
it's-
somewhat, but it remains just a
Okay,
once a
thank
year annual fee.
Any more? Okay, very good. Asha? Hannah, anything more on this one? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just
Mr.
have one
Chan.
quick question, was what kind of assumptions both of you have made with respect to projections in terms of mass transit or in terms of non-car
So these,
transportation?
Alan can speak to his, we don't directly look at that. We are just looking at best guesses, and they are undoubtedly imperfect, of how much people will drive, how many vehicles they will own, and how much they will drive. And you're absolutely right, if we have a revolution with lots more non-auto alternatives, then we would see less VMT, perhaps less car ownership.
Basically, you're thinking that it's so insensitive at the numbers we're seeing that you don't look at.
Yeah, but again, it could have an impact, and that's why I would emphasize for any projection, think of it as like a big cloud that's getting larger the farther out you go, because there are, and you've pointed out another excellent uncertainty. So.
Yeah, so for our projections, we use sort of baseline VMT assumptions, and I haven't shown other projections from this, but there are sort of more in the transportation realm. We're thinking about a lot more revolutionary items, such as increased pooling, increased use of micromobility, a little bit more increase in transit, and so we have investigated some of those, and yeah, again, depending on what you assume for VMT, that can have fairly significant impacts if you have sort of substantial percentage decreases in the total amount of travel that people are doing by sort of private vehicles.
Mr. Wax?
I want to add one point that is important to the people who say they're not transportation guys. The transportation guys will know this. The legislature can say that the transportation improvement fee is to be used for these purposes, and the gasoline tax is to be used for those purposes. So the change in the mix is not unimportant, because some of the money funds the California Highway Patrol and other money funds the road repair. And as we talked about total revenue, as the total revenue's composition changes over time, it has policy consequences. That should just be borne in mind.
Very good. Very good. All right. Mr. Secretary?
Another vehicle to keep an eye on going forward is annual vehicle sales. And I can tell you from, as a former auto industry person, those vehicle sales have been declining over the years. The 2018 vehicle sales nationwide was about 17 million. That could have very well been the high water mark, but we don't know. I haven't seen the numbers for 2019, but that's something to keep an eye on as these projections get refined and updated over time, because those numbers everyone in the auto industry assumes, hopefully they're wrong, but the assumption is those numbers will continue to decline because of buying habits of millennials. Millennials are generally not buying new cars. That could change, but that's something to keep an eye on.
Thank you. Mr. Marcantonio, one moment.
Yeah, thank you. You know, this is raising for me a question about, that goes back to your second slide, Steve, which is this increase in VMT. Any sense about, is that driven by the distance between homes that people can afford on the salaries they earn at the jobs they drive to, or are there other major factors involved in that?
That is one of the factors. There are a number of other issues as well. So one of the things that people often consider is improvements in fuel efficiency often leads to rebound effects because the price of driving is slightly cheaper, and so you see some increases from that. Distances increasing from home is part of that. But it's also driven by land use change, which is essentially what you're saying, but it's more than just the effect of home distance to work. It's in relation to all the other sort of access to goods and services as well.
You are all asking wonderful questions, and if we go back to this slide, you know, all projections, they look like this neat line at the end, or maybe a cloud as we give, but there are so many assumptions that we have to make, and you know, you've pointed out a number where things could be very different from kind of business as usual moving out to the future.
Mr. Finnegan, Mr. Medaffer.
Just really quick, I would just add that the economy and jobs play a huge role in VMT.
Yeah.
When we had the horrible recession, VMT was going down and everyone thought, well, that was the end of driving. Then it went up because the economy got better. So in the future, if it goes down, that will play a role.
Exactly. Jim.
And to Secretary Kim's point, as many of you know, I speak around, well, now lately around the world as a futurist on a lot of this stuff. And I frequently, when I talk to government agencies, especially whether it's the National League or the California League of Cities, that they have been so fixated on the revenue from sales tax and property tax through the vehicle license fee on vehicle sales that I just got an email the other day. When I find it, I'll send it, Mitch, so you can distribute. I think the commission would love to see it as well. There's many new services out there, and it's exactly what you're saying, Mr. Secretary. Why buy a car? When you take the insurance costs, the cost to pay to make the car payment, the cost to park the vehicle, new services, and auto manufacturers are now offering this as mobility as a service, basically, where you can just, no different than the TNCs with the Ubers and the Lyfts, but now you actually could basically rent your car instead of owning it. And they're making a very strong argument to show that it's much more cost effective to go that route. And as I say frequently in my talks, 25 years from now, I know that's quick, I believe that people won't be buying cars to the extent that they are any longer. And I worry for cities and states and everybody else as to what is going to replace that revenue. And it's going to be a big change, a big change.
Thank you very much. To that point, I just saw a presentation with a home builder designing a product in order to make it affordable to millennials. They do not build a garage. They're not building garages in the product. But the homeowner association owns 20 Teslas. And if a millennial wants to own a home and pull up a car, they just call up their HOA. And so you've saved, talk about, you know, housing and land use connections and transportation connections. That's where the future in many respects is. Well, as you said, we'll see. The minute they start making babies and they want a backyard for the dog and the kids, that'll be another whole discussion that we'll have in a couple of years. But very good. Hannah, let's keep us on track. Move us. These people are hungry, girl.
I know. Okay, I'm just going to wrap this up. We had a couple more slides. I'm just going to breeze through them. So this is actually the look at the national projections. And in essence, it's showing that because of fuel efficiency, the revenue projections are decreasing. And this one is just different sources we pulled that look at VMT and diesel and gas consumption, just showing the difference between the increase in VMT and the kind of flat line of gas and diesel, probably again due to fuel efficiency. And so I think, and we had this conclusion slide, but really the takeaway from this presentation, I think, is that we do have some time because of the revenues that we have in SB1, but the road charge is still the most viable long-term option for transportation revenue. And it has broader implications than just the revenue pieces we've discussed earlier. It also has equity implications, and it aligns with environmental policy. So that's the end of our presentation.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions for Hannah? All right. We're going to take a quick, you have to relieve your seats because you can't sit this long and still stay healthy. So a little bit of a break. Douglas, you're going to direct us to get some lunch over by you and walk around a bit, use the restrooms, and we'll call you back in, 15 minutes? And we'll keep working. So thank you all. 15-minute break.